The marble floors gleamed like mirrors beneath the late afternoon light spilling through the glass walls of Ocean Crest villas. The air smelled faintly of salt and citrus, a mix of ocean breeze and lemon polish. I walked in beside my father Henry, 63, a man who carried arrogance like a second skin, and my sister Lydia, whose perfume announced her before she ever spoke. The realtor's voice echoed softly across the spacious lobby, polite, professional. "Welcome to Ocean Crest Villas," he said. "This property is one of our newest developments in San Diego, priced at $20 million. My father chuckled under his breath, the sound sharp as broken glass. "20 million, Emma. Are you here to dream or to waste this poor man's time?" Lydia's laughter joined his light but cutting. "She's still paying off her credit cards, Dad. Maybe we should start with something under 1 million. A few people turned to look. The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the clink of Lydia's bracelet. I smiled, not because I found it funny, but because I had promised myself I would never let them see me flinch again. I reached into my purse, took out my phone, and opened my banking app. "Mr. Grant," I said to the realtor, keeping my tone calm, "transfer 30% of the total to the escrow account. The remaining balance will be processed later today." He blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say 30%? I repeated. A moment later, his phone buzzed. A message popped up on the screen between us. "Transaction complete, $6,000,000 deposited." The silence that followed could have filled the entire lobby. My father froze, the smile draining from his face. Lydia's lips parted slightly, her eyes wide as if the floor beneath her had vanished. "Now," I said, softly sliding my phone back into my bag, "shall we take the tour?" The realtor straightened quickly, clearing his throat. "Of course, Miss West. This way, please." My father didn't move. His voice came out low and rough. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "For once, maybe take me at my word." Lydia recovered first, masking her shock with an awkward laugh. "Well, this is unexpected. Everything is," I said, walking past them toward the glass elevator. "Until it isn't." The realtor pressed the button, his eyes darting nervously between us. The mirrored doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside, watching my reflection stretch beside theirs. The confident daughter, the skeptical father, the envious sister. The air inside felt colder, sharper. Henry adjusted his cufflinks, muttering, "A fool and her money are soon parted." I didn't respond. The elevator began to rise, humming softly. Through the glass, the coastline unfolded, sunlight shimmering over the Pacific waves, breaking against the cliffs below. My heartbeat steadied with each floor. When we reached the top level, the doors opened onto a vast hallway bathed in light. The scent of cedar and new paint lingered in the air. The realtor gestured ahead, "This way, to the main living area." We followed him into an open-concept space, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ocean like a moving painting. The horizon glowed gold beneath the setting sun. This house features 7 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, and a private infinity pool. The realtor set his tone bright again. "It's built for privacy with direct beach access and a panoramic ocean view." Lydia whistled under her breath. "It's stunning." Dad folded his arms. "Stunningly overpriced." Then, turning to me, he added, "You really think this is where you belong?" I walked to the window, letting the warm light hit my face. "Maybe it's where I was always meant to end up," he snorted. "End up? You never stay anywhere long enough to end up." I turned to face him fully. "That's because I was too busy leaving behind the places that kept me small." For a moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the distant call of gulls and the slow rhythm of the waves. The realtor shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check something on his tablet. Behind me, Lydia's heels clicked against the marble. "You don't have to prove anything, you know," she said, her voice syrupy. "We just don't want you to embarrass yourself." I smiled faintly. "You've already taken care of that." Her expression faltered. My father's jaw clenched. The realtor cleared his throat again. "Would you like to see the balcony, Miss West?" "Yes," I said. "Let's." We stepped outside. The wind off the Pacific wrapped around us, carrying the smell of salt and sunlight. Below, the water sparkled like liquid glass. My father leaned against the railing, his knuckles white. "You know, some people spend their lives chasing things they'll never have. And some people," I said quietly, "spend their lives laughing at what they'll never understand." He looked at me then, really looked as if seeing me for the first time. His face tightened, but he said nothing. Lydia stared out at the horizon, her hair whipping in the wind. "So this is really happening," she said almost to herself. "Yes," I replied. "It already did." The realtor's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, then at me. "Miss West," he said with a note of awe, "the full transfer has just been confirmed. The property is officially under your ownership." The words hung there like a verdict. I turned toward my father and sister. Their faces mirrored disbelief, pride shattering into silence, the kind of silence I'd waited my whole life to hear. I took a slow breath. "It's strange, isn't it?" I said. "You spend years telling someone what they can't do, and then one day you realize they did it without asking you." Henry opened his mouth, then closed it again. The light caught the lines around his eyes, suddenly deeper. Lydia took a step back, shaking her head like she was trying to wake up from a dream. The realtor smiled, professional but a little uncertain. "Congratulations, Miss West." I nodded. "Thank you. Let's finish the tour." As we walked through the house, the echo of our footsteps followed like ghosts. Every room was filled with sunlight, gold and silver spilling across marble, glass, and stone. It was more than a house. It was a reminder carved into space itself that silence can be louder than laughter. At the far end of the corridor, a mirrored wall caught my reflection. I stopped for a moment. The woman looking back wasn't the one who used to bite her tongue at family dinners or cry in parking lots after another job rejection. This one stood taller, steadier, built from every dismissal she'd ever survived. I reached out, touching the glass. "You did it," I whispered under my breath. Lydia's voice called from behind me. "What did you say?" "Nothing," I said, turning toward them with a small smile. "Just thinking about foundations." The realtor led us downstairs again. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss, sealing the tension inside. My father stared at the floor, silent for once. Lydia crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. When the doors opened, the sunlight hit my face again. I walked out, first head, high heels tapping against the marble. Outside, the ocean shimmered beyond the glass, endless and alive. I breathed it in, the salt, the light, the proof that I no longer needed their permission to exist. Behind me, I could hear my father's voice break the silence, low and disbelieving. $20 million. I smiled to myself, not turning back. "That's just the beginning," I whispered. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small at all. The restaurant glowed with soft amber light, the kind that made everyone look more successful than they really were. The ocean outside shimmered through the glass walls, waves catching the moonlight. It was my father's birthday dinner, a ritual that felt more like a performance than a celebration. Every year, the same people came: old friends, business associates, relatives who liked to gossip but pretended it was affection. And every year, I told myself I wouldn't let his words get to me. Henry West sat at the head of the long table, his gray suit pressed perfectly, a gold watch gleaming under the candlelight. Beside him was Lydia, radiant in her red silk dress, the kind of color that demanded attention. I sat across from them, the quiet one, always 2 seats too far from the laughter. The waiter poured another round of Chardonnay, and the sound of glasses clinking filled the air. My father rose with a commanding smile. "Let's make a toast," he announced. "To Lydia, our pride and joy." The youngest regional director in her firm's history. He lifted his glass high, and everyone followed. Lydia blushed, pretending modesty, her hand brushing the diamond on her wrist. "Oh, Dad," she said softly, as if the compliment embarrassed her. "He wasn't done." "She's proof that hard work pays off. That discipline and focus bring rewards." Then, almost too casually, his gaze slid to me. "And as for my other daughter, well, she's still searching for her calling. But that's what youth is for, isn't it? The table laughed politely at first, then freely, as if it were expected. I smiled, a reflex I had mastered years ago, and stared down at my plate. My fork hovered over the asparagus that suddenly looked too green, too alive for the moment. An uncle leaned over to his wife, whispering, "At least she's creative." The words were meant as kindness, but they landed like a bruise. I wanted to tell them I had finished a project that week, a boutique interior for a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I wanted to tell my father that clients had praised my designs, that I was getting there step by step, but I didn't. Words never made a difference at that table. My mother's chair was empty. She had been gone for almost a year, and without her the table felt colder. When she was alive, she used to laugh at his sharp comments, change the subject, touch my hand under the table. "You don't have to prove anything," she would whisper. "You just have to keep going." Now, there was no one to intercept his barbs, no one to soften the edges of his pride. After dinner, my father ordered dessert wine, his voice booming over the clatter of dishes. "You know, I always say, Lydia takes after me, structured, ambitious. Emma, on the other hand, takes after her mother, dreamy, emotional. Lovely traits, but not exactly profitable." Lydia laughed, the sound like glass breaking softly. "Oh, Dad, don't embarrass her," he chuckled. "She knows I'm only being honest." The laughter that followed was thinner this time, less genuine. But the damage was done. I could feel my throat tightening, my pulse echoing in my ears. I looked around the table, every face illuminated by the soft restaurant light, and I realized something that chilled me more than his words ever could. They all believed him. The next morning his voice woke me from half sleep. "I want to see you in my study," he called down the hallway. I walked in, still groggy, the smell of coffee and old paper filling the air. The blinds were half-drawn, sunlight cutting across his desk. Lydia was already there, perched on a chair, immaculate as always. Henry didn't look up from the papers he was signing. "I've been revising the family trust," he said flatly. "It's time we get things in order." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He finally met my eyes. "The main property, the shares from the construction company, they'll go to Lydia. You need to earn your place before you inherit anything." Lydia sat perfectly still, her expression carefully neutral. I swallowed hard. "What did Mom think about that?" he exhaled sharply. "Your mother wasn't a businesswoman. She didn't understand what it takes to protect an estate." My voice trembled despite my effort to sound steady. "You mean she believed in fairness?" He leaned back, studying me as though I were a foolish intern. "Life isn't fair, Emma. It rewards those who plan." Lydia finally spoke, soft but pointed. "Dad's right. You have potential, but you need focus. Maybe once you settle down, he'll reconsider." I turned to her, anger flaring, but I swallowed it. There was no point arguing with people who had already written your story for you. That night, I packed a suitcase. Sketchbooks, a few changes of clothes, and my mother's wedding ring, the only thing I refused to leave behind. As I zipped the bag, Lydia appeared at the doorway, her arms crossed. "You're really going?" she asked. "I am," she sighed. "You always take things too personally." "I just finally believe what you all keep telling me," I said quietly. "That I don't belong here." Her eyes narrowed, but I caught a flicker of something softer beneath it, fear, maybe, or confusion. "You think you'll make it out there on your own?" I met her gaze. "I already am." The next morning before dawn, I drove away. The coastal fog hung low, swallowing the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel as if I were holding onto a new life by force. The highway curved along the ocean, silver waves crashing against dark cliffs. Somewhere between Santa Barbara and Los Angeles, I pulled over, unable to keep driving without breathing. The horizon stretched endlessly, and for the first time, I felt something that almost resembled freedom. I took out my sketchbook and flipped to a blank page. The pencil moved almost on its own, a house open and glass-walled, perched on the edge of the sea. It was nothing like the one I grew up in. It had light transparency, space to breathe. When I finished, I stared at the drawing and whispered to myself, someday. The wind whipped through the open car window, carrying the scent of salt and rain. My phone buzzed with messages from Lydia, half concern, half control. I turned it off. The sun broke through the clouds, streaking the ocean in gold. My mother's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "You don't need them to believe in you, Emma. You just have to keep building." Years later, I would think of that moment every time I signed a contract, every time I laid a foundation stone for a new project. But that morning, it was just me, a pencil, and a promise to myself. As I drove toward Los Angeles, the world seemed to open wider with each mile. The humiliation from the night before still burned, but underneath it, something else began to grow resolve. At a stoplight near the city's edge, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were tired red from crying, but steady. "You'll see," I whispered to the girl in the mirror. "You'll build something they can't tear down." The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator. Years would pass before my father and sister saw me again. But even then, their laughter would still echo in my mind. Only this time it would sound different, not a wound, but a reminder. Because every empire, I later learned, begins with a single blow you decide not to let destroy you. And mine began with a toast I was never meant to survive. The morning light streamed through the half-open blinds of my apartment in downtown Los Angeles, turning the air golden. My coffee sat untouched beside a stack of blueprints. I had been staring at them for an hour, my mind looping through the same memory I had tried to bury for years, the day my father sold our home. It had been 10 years ago, not long after my mother's funeral. The house stood on a cliff, overlooking the ocean in Santa Barbara, its white walls catching the light like a beacon. I could still remember her laughter echoing down the halls, the smell of cinnamon from her Sunday baking. It wasn't just a house. It was her. I was sitting on the porch steps that afternoon, sketchbook in hand, when my father came outside, phone pressed to his ear, pacing. His voice was low but sharp. "I told you Greg closed the deal by Friday. It's not sentimental, it's an asset." The word hit me like a slap. I looked up. "You're selling the house." He ended the call, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. "We can't afford to keep it, Emma. Maintenance, taxes, it's too much for something no one lives in." "No one lives in it because you won't," I said, my voice breaking. "It's not just a property, it's Mom's home." He exhaled through his nose. "Your mother was sentimental, I'm practical. That house won't bring her back." "She built that kitchen with her own hands," I whispered. "She planted the rose garden. You can't just sell that." He turned away, already bored with the conversation. "You'll understand when you grow up." But I did understand. I understood he wasn't grieving. He was erasing. That night I overheard him on the phone again. His voice was muffled through the study door, but the words were clear enough. "Undervalued, yes, but it clears my debt. Just move fast before the appraisal expires." My heart dropped. He wasn't just selling it, he was giving it away. The home that carried every trace of my mother was being traded like collateral. I stood in the hallway, hands trembling, feeling something in me harden. That was the night I stopped believing he would ever protect what mattered. By the end of the week, strangers were walking through the living room with clipboards. Realtors, investors, all looking at it like it was a prize to be taken. I hid in the corner of the garden, sketching the outline of the house one last time. The soft hum of the ocean drowned out their voices. I drew every window, every curve, every brick. I wanted to remember the way the sunlight hit the porch, how the shadows stretched across the tiles at dusk. When the sale papers were signed, my father didn't look at me. He just said, "It's done." I didn't answer. I only stared at him and thought, if you could sell our home like that, then one day I'll build one you'll never forget. That vow became the quiet engine behind every step I took afterward. My first apartment was small enough to fit inside the dining room of the house we lost. It sat above a hardware store, the kind of place where sawdust hung in the air and the ceiling creaked when the trucks passed. But it was mine. The rent was cheap, and the owner didn't mind if I stayed up sketching through the night. I worked as a junior assistant for a design firm that paid little but taught me everything about the business. During the day, I fetched coffee and measured spaces for other people's visions. At night, I created my own. I covered the walls with sketches, boutique hotels, coastal villas, wide glass structures that reflected the ocean like a mirror. One evening, as I hunched over a half-finished drawing, my penlight flickered out. I rubbed my eyes, exhausted. My stomach grumbled, but there was no food left in the kitchen. I looked at the lines on the page and whispered to myself, "Every foundation begins with pressure." That line became my mantra. A few months later, I met Noah Rivera, a seasoned architect who visited our firm as a consultant. He noticed one of my sketches sticking out from my folder during a meeting. "You drew this?" he asked. Embarrassed, I nodded. "It's just a concept. I like to play with structure." He studied it for a long time, then said, "This isn't play, this is vision." He offered to mentor me. I didn't trust it at first. Men in power rarely helped without wanting something in return. But Noah wasn't like that. He was patient, blunt, and saw potential in me that no one else had bothered to look for. Under his guidance, I learned everything the firm wouldn't teach me: budgeting, contracts, negotiation. "Talent gets you noticed," he said once, "but patience keeps you alive." We worked together on a small renovation project in Palm Springs, a boutique hotel called the Desert Haven. The budget was modest, but the clients were kind and the project turned out beautiful. When the opening article was published, they mentioned my name alongside Noah's. It was one line in a local magazine, but it meant the world. I called my father that night impulsively, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud. He didn't pick up. Instead, Lydia texted, "Saw your name in something called the Desert Haven. Cute. Congrats." I read the message twice, then deleted it. I had no room for old voices in my new life. Years passed in a blur of blueprints and deadlines. My reputation grew slowly, the way cracks form in stone, barely visible, until one day they reshape everything. I started Aurora West Studios, naming it after my mother. The name was a promise that her gentleness and my grit could coexist in something lasting. By 32, I was managing a team of designers and consulting on luxury hotels from Miami to Santa Monica. Success didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in quietly, disguised as exhaustion, perseverance, and small wins that no one else saw. Still, I kept one file on my desktop labeled Ocean Crest Villas. It was a new residential development being built on the very cliff where my childhood home once stood. When I saw the location listed in an industry report, my chest tightened. A year later, I drove there. The site was half-finished, steel frames, scaffolding, the scent of fresh cement. The Pacific stretched endlessly beyond it, just as it had when I was a child sitting on that porch. But the air felt different now, lighter. A voice behind me said, "You must be Miss West." I turned to see a man in his 30s, clipboard in hand, neatly dressed, his expression open and polite. "Jack Grant," he introduced himself. "Lead Realtor for Ocean Crest Villas." "Are you here for the private viewing?" I nodded. "Yes, I want to see the property that's closest to the cliff." He led me through the unfinished hallways, describing features: floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, sustainable architecture. But I barely heard him. All I could see was the view from the glass walls, the same horizon my mother used to paint every morning. We stopped near the balcony where sunlight poured through. The waves crashed below, and the air smelled faintly of salt and steel. Jack handed me a set of papers. "We're opening pre-purchases next week. I can reserve one for you if you'd like." I looked down at the papers, then back out at the ocean. "This house," I said quietly, "it's where my story started." Jack smiled politely. "Then it sounds like the perfect ending." I shook my head, a small smile forming. "Not an ending, just a foundation." He didn't understand, but that was fine. As I drove away, the sun dipped low, setting the horizon on fire. I felt calm, almost reverent. The place that once symbolized loss now called me back, not as a daughter, but as a builder. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made my decision. I called Jack and said, "Reserve the villa on the cliff. I'll finalize the transfer this week." He hesitated, That's one of our most exclusive listings, Miss West. Are you sure? I smiled, staring at the framed sketch of my mother's house on my wall. I've never been more sure of anything. When I hung up, the city outside was bathed in gold cranes, moving like slow shadows against the skyline. Somewhere deep inside, I could hear the echo of my father's voice. From years ago, you'll never belong in that world. I whispered into the quiet room, maybe belonging isn't given. Maybe you build it yourself. The sound of the ocean drifted faintly through my open window, as if the past had finally stopped chasing me. And for the first time since leaving home, I felt ready to face him again. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of my apartment, cutting thin lines across the wooden floor. I stood in front of the mirror, fastening a single pearl earring, my mother's. My reflection looked calm, maybe too calm for the kind of day that was coming. Outside, San Diego was already awake, waves glinting under a soft haze of gold. I picked up my portfolio, the one with Aurora West Studios embossed in small silver letters, and headed out. The drive to Ocean Crest Villas took 40 minutes, most of it along the coast. The sea shimmered beside me, endless and steady, like a reminder of everything I had survived to get here. By the time I pulled into the circular driveway, my pulse had steadied. Jack Grant waited by the glass entrance, clipboard in hand. Miss West, he greeted warmly, extending his hand. It's good to see you again. Likewise, I said. His handshake was firm but polite. He carried the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in any room but didn't need to prove it. I've set up the full tour, he said. The main villa rooftop and private balcony. It's quite a sight this time of day. I'm sure it is, I replied, my tone lighter than I felt. As we entered the lobby, the scent of citrus and salt water blended with the clean smell of polished marble. The space was all light and reflection, every surface catching the ocean outside and pulling it inward. Jack walked ahead, describing features with the precision of someone who truly admired what he sold. Imported Carrara marble, he said, pointing toward the floor. The developer wanted the design to reflect the balance between structure and nature. Strong, but not heavy. I smiled faintly. Balance is harder to build than strength. He glanced at me, curious but respectful. I imagine you'd know better than most. Before I could respond, the glass doors behind us slid open. The sound of heels against marble echoed like an intrusion. Well, look at this place, my father's voice boomed bright and sharp. I can see why they're charging $20 million. You can practically smell the money. I turned slowly. Henry West, still tall despite the years, stood there in a tailored suit that tried too hard. Beside him was Lydia, immaculate, as always, a designer handbag dangling from her wrist. Jack straightened immediately, professional mask snapping into place. Good morning, Mr. West, Miss West. Welcome to Ocean Crest Villas. Henry chuckled. Thank you, son, but I'm just here to make sure my daughter doesn't embarrass herself with whatever fantasy she's chasing today. Lydia smiled, that same polished smirk that used to win over teachers and strangers. We wouldn't miss this. It's not every day you get to watch your little sister play pretend. Jack looked from them to me, uncertain. I nodded once, signaling him to continue. Let's start the tour. We moved through the space in silence. The sunlight hit the walls in long, soft beams, and every surface gleamed like it had something to prove. Henry ran his hand along the granite counter. I've built houses like this, he said. Takes a lot of money and even more luck to keep them standing. Good thing I've never depended on luck, I said quietly. He laughed. No, you depend on ideas. That's the problem. Lydia was already taking photos, her voice dripping with false curiosity. Are you sure you can even qualify for this place, Em? The HOA fees alone could eat someone alive. Jack stepped in quickly. Ocean Crest properties are indeed selective, but Miss West. Henry waved him off. No need, son. We're all family here. We know what's real. I said nothing. There was no use defending myself against people who thrived on being doubted. We reached the elevator. Jack pressed the button, his posture stiff with discomfort. When the doors opened, the mirrored interior reflected us all together. The confident father, the flawless daughter, and me standing between them like an old scar that refused to fade. The elevator ride was quiet, save for the hum of machinery and the faint sound of waves below. Henry adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection smirking at mine. "You know some people aren't meant for this kind of life," he murmured. I met his gaze in the mirror. Maybe not, but some of us build our own. His eyes flicked away first. When the doors opened, Jack gestured toward the main hall. "This way, to the living area. The view here is incredible." The room unfolded in light. The Pacific stretched endlessly through the glass walls, blue and silver under the late morning Sunday. Lydia walked straight to the window, pressing her manicured fingers to the glass. "Wow," she said. "Imagine living here." "I am," I replied. She turned half amused. "Still dreaming big, huh?" Jack cleared his throat. "Miss West, perhaps you'd like to see the upper terrace." We followed him up the glass staircase. The air grew cooler as we climbed, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly. When we reached the top, the ocean wind rushed in through the open doors, carrying the smell of salt and light. "This is the terrace," Jack said. "Panoramic view of the coastline. Sunsets here are something else." Henry stepped out first, hands on his hips. "It's impressive," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "Too much for someone like you, though." "Dad," Lydia said, laughing lightly, "don't be so cruel. She's trying." Jack shifted uneasily, pretending to check his notes. I took a slow breath, feeling the sting of every word but refusing to let it show. "I've been told that before," I said. "That I reached too high." Henry chuckled. "And what's your excuse this time?" I walked past him, to the edge of the balcony, resting my hand on the cool glass. The sea stretched infinitely beyond us, unbothered by human judgment. "No excuse," I said softly. "Just proof." He frowned. "Proof." Before I could answer, Jack spoke up, perhaps trying to ease the tension. "Miss West's company, Aurora West Studios, has quite the reputation. I've seen some of your hotel projects, actually. You've built a name for yourself." Lydia blinked, caught off guard. "Aurora West. That's your company, yes." I turned to face her. "We just finished the Haven Hotel in Miami," Henry snorted. "Big talk. You expect me to believe you built all this from your little art projects. Believe what you want," I said. "It doesn't change the truth." The wind whipped around us, tugging at my hair. For a moment, the world was all brightness and sound, the waves, the breeze, my heartbeat steady in my chest. Jack looked between us, hesitant but loyal to professionalism. "Would you like to see the rooftop next?" "Yes," I said. "Let's." The elevator ride to the rooftop felt heavier this time. Henry muttered under his breath about kids and their illusions. Lydia scrolled through her phone, pretending to be bored but sneaking glances at me. Jack avoided eye contact altogether. When the doors opened, sunlight flooded the space. The rooftop was vast and open, lined with glass railings that framed the horizon. The Pacific sparkled in every direction. Lydia gasped, despite herself. "Okay," she said. "This view is insane." Jack smiled. "It really is something special." Henry walked to the edge, squinting against the glare. "A place like this needs someone who already belongs to this world," he said quietly. "You never did learn where you belong, did you?" His words hung in the air like smoke. I stepped forward until I stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "Maybe I'm still deciding," I said. He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face. Lydia looked away, suddenly silent. The ocean roared below us, filling the space between every word we hadn't said. Jack took a small step back, lowering his clipboard. "You know," he said gently, "most people would give anything to stand where you are right now." I looked at him, then back at my father. Then maybe I should start acting like I deserve it. The wind carried our silence across the rooftop. Lydia finally spoke, her voice small. "You always say things like that," she murmured. "You can't take it seriously." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to prove. When the elevator doors closed behind us, sealing the sound of waves away, I caught Jack's reflection in the glass, watchful kind. He didn't say a word, but his look said everything. Respect. Understanding. Maybe even admiration. For the first time that morning, I allowed myself a quiet breath of relief. The humiliation hadn't broken me, it had clarified me. As we descended, I watched the numbers on the panel blink slowly downward, one by one, until we reached the ground floor. The doors slid open. "Same time tomorrow?" Jack asked softly. I met his eyes. "Yes. Let's show them what success really looks like." And as I stepped into the sunlight, the ocean wind followed, cool and clean, like the beginning of something finally turning in my favor. The elevator doors opened onto the rooftop, and sunlight flooded in like a tidal wave. The Pacific stretched endlessly beyond the glass railings, blue and blinding. The air smelled of salt steel and quiet judgment. Jack Grant led the way, clipboard tucked under his arm, his voice steady, though his eyes flickered between me and my family. "This is the glass balcony," he said. "It's one of the signature features of Ocean Crest Villas. Full panoramic view. The floor panels are reinforced tempered glass, so it's completely safe." Henry walked forward, his steps deliberate, inspecting every corner like a man who thought his opinion mattered more than fact. "Safe," he scoffed. "I've seen cheaper projects collapse for less. These things always look good until someone falls through." Lydia laughed softly, looping her arm through his. "Oh, Dad, stop scaring him. Besides, I think the only thing that might break here is Emma's bank account." Their laughter blended into the wind. I didn't flinch. I had learned long ago that silence unsettled them more than any argument ever could. Jack smiled awkwardly, shifting the conversation. "The property's view really is unmatched. On clear days, you can see Catalina Island in the distance." Henry leaned against the railing, squinting toward the horizon. "You know, Emma," he said, "places like this are for people who already belong in this world, not for those pretending they do." Lydia nodded, feigning sympathy. "He's not wrong, sis. Maybe this is aspirational." Jack froze, sensing the tension. "Perhaps we could move on to the eye," interrupted gently. "We'll stay a bit longer." The ocean wind pushed against my blazer, cool and sharp. The silence between us thickened until Henry filled it, as he always did. "You've always been the dreamer," he said, voice half amused, half cruel. "Never understood reality. Still chasing projects that don't pay." "I'm not chasing anything," I said quietly. He tilted his head, smirking. "No. Then what do you call this circus?" I walked past him toward the glass floor. The surface glimmered under the sun, clear enough to see the waves crashing hundreds of feet below. I stood there perfectly still, the light refracting around my shoes. My reflection looked smaller than the ocean, but steadier than their laughter. "This isn't a circus," I said. "It's a purchase." Lydia's laugh cracked the air. "A purchase, please. You couldn't even pay off your student loans last time I checked." "Those are long gone," I said. Henry chuckled, deep and condescending. "Don't embarrass yourself, Emma. You're talking about $20 million. You barely made rent when I last heard from you." Jack shifted, clearly uncomfortable, but I could tell he was watching closely, curious now. I turned slowly, meeting my father's eyes. "Would you like to see how this ends, Dad?" He blinked, thrown off. "What does that mean?" I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hand didn't shake. The device unlocked with a soft click. "Mr. Grant," I said calmly, "please call your finance department. I'm authorizing the transaction for Villa 9 Amperes. Jack hesitated. "Miss West, are you sure you 30% deposit now?" I said. "The rest will be processed this afternoon," Lydia snorted. "Oh, stop. No one's buying your little performance." Henry crossed his arms, amusement flashing in his eyes. "Let her play. Maybe the realtor gets a laugh out of it too." I pressed a button on my phone, confirming the authorization. The wind caught my hair, lifting it gently as the seconds passed. Then, from Jack's pocket, his tablet buzzed. He looked down, and his expression changed. His eyebrows lifted, then his eyes darted to me. "Miss West," he said slowly, "I've just received confirmation." The deposit 6 million has cleared. The words struck the air like a crack of thunder. Henry froze. Lydia blinked, the color draining from her face. The wind rushed louder, as if the ocean itself had gasped. I slipped the phone back into my bag. "Now you can stop pretending I'm pretending," I said softly. Jack recovered his professionalism, though his voice carried an edge of awe. "Congratulations, Miss West. The property is officially reserved under your name." Lydia's lips parted. How did you even—" "By working while you were watching," I said. Henry stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You could have told us." "You never listened," I replied. His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had no script to hide behind. Jack, sensing the intimacy of the moment, moved a few steps away, giving us space. Lydia fumbled for her phone as if needing proof that what she heard was real. "You're serious," she whispered. "You actually—" "Yes," I said. "I actually—" Henry's voice came quieter this time. "You did this with your company, Aurora West Studios," I said. "We build, design, invest." The name's probably familiar. His gaze flickered, recognition and disbelief fighting for dominance. "Aurora," he repeated. "You named it after your mother." I nodded. Someone had to remember her properly. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult he had ever thrown at me. He looked away first, his eyes fixed on the ocean. Lydia shifted her weight, her confidence gone. "You kept this from us," she said. "There wasn't much point in telling you," I replied. Jack reappeared near the doorway, tone steady but respectful. "If you'd like, Miss West, we can finalize the paperwork later today. I'll arrange private access for your closing. Tomorrow morning will do," I said. He nodded. "Of course." Henry finally found his voice. "You've changed," he murmured. "No," I said. "I just stopped asking for permission." Lydia exhaled sharply. "You make it sound so easy." It wasn't. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind swept across the rooftop, rattling the glass panels beneath our feet. The ocean stretched endlessly calm and indifferent to our small human victories. I turned to Jack. "Show me the balcony again." He guided me toward the far end, where the glass railing wrapped around the corner of the building. I stood there, overlooking the city and the sea. Behind me, my father and sister lingered by the elevator, unsure whether to follow or retreat. Jack said quietly, "It's a beautiful view." "It is," I said, "especially from this side." He glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "They'll talk about this moment for years, you know." "I hope not," I said. "Let the silence do the talking for once." When I turned back, Henry was staring at me. Not with anger, but something close to awe. The man who had laughed in marble lobbies now looked like he was trying to remember how to stand tall. Lydia's phone hung loosely at her side, forgotten. Jack's tablet buzzed again. He checked the notification, then looked at me with quiet respect. "Miss West, the final transfer has been processed. The full amount." "Congratulations." Henry's breath caught. $20 million. The words came out barely above a whisper. I looked at him, the corners of my mouth softening. "It's just a number, Dad. What matters is what you build from it." He didn't reply. He just stared, the old certainty gone from his eyes. As we walked back to the elevator, Lydia trailed behind, silent for once. Jack pressed the button. The mirrored doors opened, catching our reflections. I stood in front this time. Henry and Lydia were behind me, their faces small in the glass. Jack's voice was gentle. "You handled that with grace." I smiled faintly. Grace is louder than noise. The elevator began to descend, the hum of machinery the only sound between us. When the doors opened again, sunlight poured into the lobby, bright and warm. I stepped out first, head high. Outside, the Pacific shimmered beyond the glass, steady and alive. The air smelled like beginnings. Behind me, my father murmured something I barely heard. Unbelievable. It wasn't an insult this time. It was surrender. I didn't turn around. Some moments don't need witnesses to count. For the first time in my life, their silence didn't hurt, it felt like peace. And that, I realized, was the sound of victory. The city woke slowly under a pale fog, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. From my office window, the Pacific was a silver sheet of light, endless and calm. I held my coffee cup between both hands and watched the morning unfold, the hum of Aurora West Studios starting to rise behind me, phones ringing, printers clicking, footsteps moving across polished floors. The world outside moved fast, but inside time felt suspended. On my desk, my phone buzzed with alerts. I glanced down. Headlines, messages, links. My name in bold letters. Heiress buys $20 M Ocean Villa in cash. Family caught off guard. I scrolled through the photos, attached a paparazzi shot of me stepping out of the elevator, my father and sister frozen behind me. Lydia's shocked expression was everywhere, captions labeling her the jealous sibling. My father's face was described as the patriarch outplayed. I set the phone face down, exhaling slowly. The noise outside the glass walls grew louder. I could hear Clara, my assistant, whispering in the hallway before pushing the door open slightly. "They're calling it the West family drama," she said. "You're trending again. Want me to filter out the press requests?" "Yes," I said. "All of them." She hesitated. "Even the ones from Architect Digest, especially them." Clara stepped further inside, lowering her voice. "Your father gave a statement to a business channel this morning. He called it a misunderstanding." I smiled faintly. "Of course he did." Clara frowned. "Do you want to respond?" "No," I said. "Let the silence do the work." She studied me for a moment. "You're calmer than I'd be." I looked back toward the ocean, the reflection of my face faint in the glass. Calm is the best armor when everyone else is screaming. Outside, the phones kept ringing. I sipped my coffee. The bitterness grounded me. Meanwhile, across the city, my father sat in his study, blinds drawn halfway against the morning light. His desk was cluttered with old invoices and unopened letters. The TV played softly muted news segments, looping footage of our rooftop confrontation. Lydia paced behind him, her heels striking the floor in quick, anxious beats. "They're humiliating us, Dad," she snapped. "The clips are everywhere. People are saying you looked like a fool." Henry didn't look up. "Maybe because I was," he said. She froze, startled. "You're taking her side." Now he turned slowly, his eyes tired. "No, I'm taking responsibility." Lydia's voice cracked. "For what?" "For letting her walk all over us," he sighed. "For not seeing her clearly before she did." Lydia stared at him, her anger faltering. The silence between them stretched. When she finally left the room, she slammed the door hard enough to make the photo frames rattle. Henry stayed, seated, staring at the frozen image on the TV, me standing in the sunlight, phone in hand, his own reflection behind me, looking small and unsteady. He reached for the remote, turned the screen off, and whispered to himself, "She really did it." Back at the studio, Clara knocked again before entering with a cautious smile. "Someone's online too," she said. "Henry West." I hesitated, staring at the blinking light on the phone. "You can take a message. He said it's important." I sighed. "Put him through." There was a faint click, then silence. My father's voice came through, quieter than I remembered. "You made quite a statement," he said. "I wasn't trying to," I replied. "I was just buying a house." "You embarrassed me," he said. "No, Dad," I said softly. "You did that yourself." A pause stretched between us, filled with the sound of our shared breathing. "Are you happy now?" he asked finally. "Not happy," I said. "Just done." I ended the call before he could answer. For a while I sat there staring at the small light on the phone until it stopped blinking. My reflection in the window looked calm, but inside something fragile had shifted. That evening the sky turned orange over La Jolla. I walked barefoot along the sand, my phone left behind in the office. The sea breeze tangled my hair as I watched the tide pull back and forth, steady and unconcerned. Each wave felt like an answer to a question I hadn't realized I was asking. People think revenge feels loud, I thought. But it doesn't. It feels quiet, like the world finally matching your heartbeat. The sound of the waves grew rhythmic, hypnotic. I remembered the laughter in the lobby, the smirk on my father's face, the way Lydia's voice had curled with disbelief. All of it felt distant now, as if it belonged to another lifetime. I bent down and picked up a smooth stone from the sand, turning it over in my palm. It was cool and solid, a fragment of something ancient that had been broken and reshaped by time. Maybe that's all healing really was, staying long enough for the water to wear down the edges. By the time I returned to my apartment, the city lights had begun to glow. I poured myself a glass of wine, kicked off my shoes, and stood by the balcony. The waves below were dark now, almost invisible, except for the silver glint where the moon touched them. When I stepped inside again, my phone buzzed once more, a voicemail. It was Jack Grant. "Miss West," his voice said, hesitant but sincere. "I just wanted to say what you did yesterday. It was impressive. Most people would have yelled or stormed out. You didn't have to. You didn't need to." The message ended with silence, followed by a faint sigh before the line disconnected. I replayed it once, then deleted it, though his words stayed. I smiled, not because I needed validation, but because someone had finally seen the difference between noise and power. The next morning, the office buzzed again with energy. Lauren, my CFO, burst through the door holding a tablet. "You won't believe this," she said. The press moved on. "They're writing about your foundation now." "My what?" I asked. "The one you sketched last month. The design for the Aurora Foundation. You mentioned wanting to help women in design. Someone from the press found the renderings on the studio site." I blinked, half amused. "I haven't even finished the plans." "Well," she said, grinning, "you might want to. People are calling it your next big legacy." Legacy. The word lingered in the air, heavier than I expected. After she left, I turned my chair toward the window. Below, the cranes along the coast moved slowly, lifting steel beams toward unfinished buildings. The noise of construction echoed faintly in the distance, like a heartbeat made of metal in progress. Maybe that was my answer. Not interviews, not applause, just building. By evening, the lights softened again, and the city blurred into gold. I stayed in the office, long after everyone else had gone home, tracing lines across a new page, rough sketches of open halls, classrooms, filled with light glass walls overlooking the ocean. The blueprint for something bigger than me. My phone buzzed once more, another message. This time it was from Lydia. A single text. "You won." "Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen, then typed a single word back: "Peaceful." I set the phone aside, rolled up my sleeves, and kept drawing. Outside, the last light of the day melted into the horizon. The cranes continued their steady motion, the rhythm of building never stopping. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was proving anything. I was simply existing like the ocean below, endlessly reshaping itself, not to destroy but to endure. When I finally stood to leave, the room was dim except for the glow of the city outside. I paused by the window, letting the quiet settle around me. Revenge, I realized, was just the beginning. Peace, that was the real reward. And in the silence that followed, I could almost hear my mother's voice again, soft and certain. "You don't have to shout, sweetheart. You just have to stand long enough for the truth to echo." I turned off the lights, left the sketches on the table, and walked out into the calm. The night air met me like an embrace, cool, clean, and utterly still. The morning light poured through the wide windows of Aurora West Studios, washing the office in gold. The faint smell of coffee and freshly printed paper filled the air. The team was already at work, blueprints spread across the long oak table, pencils scratching quietly. The hum of productivity was steady, rhythmic, alive. I walked in with my laptop under my arm, nodding as Lauren looked up from her screen. "You're early," she said. "That's either a good sign or a dangerous one." "Good," I replied, setting my things down. "Always good." She grinned, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Well, you'll like this. The Harbor Point Hotel deal came through. They accepted our design proposal." I paused. "The full project." "The full one," she confirmed. "Construction starts in 3 months. It's official, Aurora West is national now." The words landed gently but powerfully. I smiled, not the big kind, but the quiet one that stays in the chest. Good, I said. Let's make sure the design feels like home, not a monument. Lauren laughed. Only you would build a multi-million-dollar hotel and worry about it feeling too proud. Pride breaks things, I said softly. Balance keeps them standing. Across the table, Clara typed notes quickly, her ponytail swaying as she worked. I'll update the renderings and get the engineering team started, she said. By the way, you have an interview this afternoon with the Architecture Journal. They want a story about your journey. I raised an eyebrow. Journey, she shrugged, their word, not mine. The rest of the morning passed in sketches and quiet conversations, the sound of the ocean faint through the windows. For the first time in years, everything felt aligned. No shouting, no proving, no pretending. Just creation. By noon, the office buzzed with energy. I walked to the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the cranes in the distance lifting steel beams into the sky. The noise of construction carried faintly on the wind. It was a beautiful sound, progress always was. When I returned inside, Lauren followed me with her tablet. You know, she said, I was thinking you've built this company from the ground up. Maybe it's time you think beyond projects. Maybe legacy. I glanced at her. Legacy, she nodded. Something that lasts when the buildings fade. Something for others. I thought of my mother then, the way she used to touch every piece of furniture she made, as if it had a heartbeat. Maybe you're right, I said. But if I'm building something like that, it has to mean something real, she smiled. Then it will. That night I stayed after everyone left. The office grew quiet, only the soft hum of the city outside. I sat at my desk and began sketching. Not for a client this time, not for profit, just for purpose. A circular building took shape under my pencil. Open spaces, curved glass walls, rooms filled with light. I added gardens on the roof, a library, work studios. A place not for profit, but for people. Underneath the drawing, I wrote 2 words, Aurora Foundation. The name felt right, alive, inevitable. When I showed Lauren the sketch the next morning, she smiled. It's beautiful, she said. What's it for? For women who never got a seat at the table, I said quietly. For people like I used to be, the ones who are told they can't build. She leaned back, studying me. That's not revenge anymore, she said. No, I agreed. It's inheritance. The news spread quickly within the studio. Clara printed the early sketches and pinned them to the wall. The team gathered around, curious and excited. A foundation, one of the designers asked. Like a mentorship space, exactly, I said. Scholarships, workshops, a design lab. No cost, no judgment, just creation. Someone clapped softly, then the whole room joined in. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't applause I needed. It was the sound of something right taking root. A few weeks later, the construction site was marked and cleared. The location overlooked the waterfront, sunlight shimmering on the waves. When I stepped onto the lot for the first time, the breeze carried the scent of salt and wet concrete. This is it, Lauren said beside me, shielding her eyes from the glare. Not yet, I said, but it will be. We met with the foreman, reviewed blueprints, discussed budgets. Every detail mattered, the orientation of the light, the placement of every door. I wanted the building to breathe. That afternoon, a journalist from the San Diego Tribune came to visit. He was young, nervous, holding a recorder and notebook. Miss West, he said, people are calling this a comeback story. You've gone from scandal to inspiration. Is that accurate? I smiled faintly. I don't believe in comebacks. I believe in continuations. He blinked, unsure how to respond. And your family? He asked cautiously. Do they support this? I looked toward the horizon. We're all still learning how to build what lasts. That line made the front page the next day. We're all still learning how to build what lasts. The article called me the quiet revolutionary. I laughed when I read it because it didn't feel like revolution. It just felt like repair. Later that week, I was in the studio, late, when Clara knocked on my door. You have to see this, she said, holding out her phone. It was a short video clip, my interview from the site shared online. Thousands of comments scrolled beneath it. People talking about the foundation, about rebuilding, about hope. "It's gone viral," she said, eyes wide. "Everyone's talking about you." I shook my head, smiling. "They should be talking about the women who'll come after me." Still, that night when I went home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the balcony watching the city lights pulse like slow-moving stars. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting to be heard. I was just existing exactly where I was supposed to be. Across the city, my father sat in his study again, the TV flickering faintly. He wasn't watching the news this time, just the video of me walking through the construction site. The camera caught the wind lifting my hair, my voice steady as I spoke, about purpose and patience. He watched it twice, then a third time. Finally, he whispered, "You built what I destroyed." His voice cracked. Outside his window, the old rose bushes bent in the wind. He leaned back, eyes glistening, a small broken smile crossing his face. "Your mother would have loved this," he murmured. At Aurora West, the days turned into weeks, and the site began to transform. Steel beams rose from the ground glass panels, caught the sunlight, and the circular frame started to take shape. Each day I visited, walking the perimeter, listening to the sound of hammers and drills, the heartbeat of new beginnings. Lauren joined me one afternoon, handing me a hard hat. "You realize you're building more than just a structure, right?" she said. "I know," I said. "It's the foundation for everyone who was ever told to stay small." She nodded, smiling. "You've changed, Emma." "No," I said, watching the workers hoist another beam into place. "I just remembered who I was before they tried to convince me otherwise." The sun began to set, casting gold light over the unfinished building. The wind carried dust and warmth through the air. For a moment, everything stood still. The past no longer felt like something I was escaping. It felt like the ground I was building on. As I left the site that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. Just 2 words, "proud." Finally, I stopped walking. The glow from the screen lit my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or disbelief. Just quiet gratitude. I typed back 1 word, "Thanks." When I looked up, the cranes were still moving against the fading sky, silhouettes of progress and forgiveness intertwined. Maybe healing doesn't come as an ending, I thought. Maybe it comes as a foundation you build piece by piece until one day you realize you're standing on something that can finally hold you. The breeze off the ocean swept across my face as I headed toward my car. The sound of construction echoed behind me, steady, certain, alive. It wasn't the sound of revenge anymore. It was the sound of legacy. The fog rolled in early that morning, wrapping downtown Los Angeles in silver haze. I stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, coffee in one hand, my briefcase in the other. The building loomed above me, columns, glass, and quiet authority. It wasn't my first time here, but it felt different now. Years ago, I had walked through these doors, terrified, fighting for my career. Today, I was walking in as someone who had already built a name, worth defending. Inside, the marble floors echoed with the sound of heels and quiet conversations. Lawyers, reporters, assistants, all moving in a current of expectation. Rebecca Lynn, my attorney, spotted me from the end of the hallway and waved me over. "They filed the appeal late last night," she said, her tone clipped but calm. "Same firm, Mercer Design." I nodded. "Of course." She handed me a thin folder, the paper warm from her hands. "They're claiming you used proprietary materials from your time at Mercer for your Harbor Point project." "Recycling the same lie," I murmured. "He's running out of ideas." Rebecca's mouth twitched into a faint smile. "That's what makes him dangerous. Men like Mercer always come back when they think they've been forgotten." The courtroom buzzed behind closed doors. I could hear chairs scraping, the muffled sound of someone clearing their throat. Rebecca placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "We've done this before," she said. "You've already won once." "This isn't about winning," I said quietly. "It's about keeping what's mine." The bailiff opened the doors and the low hum of conversation stopped. We walked to the front, past rows of curious faces. Cameras were allowed today, though muted. Their blinking lights were small reminders that the world was watching. Across the aisle sat Charles Mercer, my former boss, the man who had once told me I was talented, but not strategic enough to survive. His hair was grayer now, but his arrogance hadn't aged a day. He turned as I took my seat, offering a thin smile. "Emma West," he said, his voice oily. Still fighting ghosts, I met his gaze. Only the ones that don't know they're dead. Rebecca shot me a look, a silent warning, but there was no malice in his tone this time, just curiosity. The kind predators have before they strike. Judge Ellen Parker entered, the same woman who had presided over our case years ago. Her presence was a quiet storm measured exact. Everyone stood as she settled behind the bench. "Court is now in session," she said, her voice steady. Mercer's lawyer rose first, his suit as crisp as his tone. "Your Honor, we contend that Miss West's Harbor Point hotel design uses original templates developed under Mercer Design's corporate license." Rebecca stood immediately. "Your Honor, these allegations were disproven in 2019 when the court confirmed Miss West's exclusive ownership of all intellectual property produced post-employment. The appeal introduces no new evidence." Judge Parker adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Collins, are you claiming there is newly discovered material?" Collins hesitated. "Not discovered, reinterpreted." The judge's eyebrow arched. "That's not how the law works." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom. I kept my hands folded on the table, my expression neutral. I wasn't nervous, I was tired. Tired of fighting the same battles dressed in new suits. Mercer rose then, uninvited. "Your Honor," he began, "I think it's important to note that Miss West's entire aesthetic, her so-called minimalism, was developed under my guidance. She wouldn't even have a company if not for her time at Mercer Design." Rebecca leaned toward the microphone. "With respect, Your Honor, mentorship is not ownership." The judge nodded. "Agreed." Mercer's face tightened. "She used our contacts, our clients, our trade secrets." I stood slowly, interrupting. "What I used," I said, "was everything you said I didn't have, and I built something from it." For a moment the room went still. Judge Parker's pen tapped softly against her notes. "Miss West, please let counsel speak for you." "Yes, Your Honor," I said, sitting again. But I could feel Mercer watching me, his anger coiling like smoke. He wanted me rattled. Instead, I looked past him, focusing on the light streaming through the window. It reminded me of the first office I ever rented, small cracked walls, sunlight sneaking through cheap blinds. That's where Aurora West Studios had begun. When the judge called a short recess, Rebecca turned to me. "You were brilliant," she said. Calm and controlled. "I wasn't calm," I said. "I was remembering." She tilted her head. "Remembering what? How small I used to feel sitting across from men like him." We stepped into the hallway. A few reporters lingered near the doors. One called out, "Miss West, any comments on the case?" I smiled politely. "The truth doesn't need commentary." Rebecca smirked. "You're getting good at this." After recess, the proceedings resumed. Rebecca presented her exhibits, dated sketches, archived emails, contracts bearing my signature. Every piece was proof of my independence. She placed them in front of the judge with quiet precision. Mercer's lawyer flipped through the documents, his confidence fading with each page. When he finally looked up, his tone was less sharp. Even if these designs were hers, the foundation of her firm, its identity, was built during her tenure at Mercer Design. "Doesn't that merit acknowledgement?" Rebecca's reply was ice and reason. "Acknowledgement is not ownership. Inspiration is not theft." Judge Parker leaned back, eyes moving between us. "I've seen this argument before," she said, "and I'll say now what I said then. Justice doesn't bend to ego." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The court finds no merit in the appeal. Aurora West Studios retains all intellectual property rights. Case dismissed." The sound that followed was almost too quiet to notice, just a breath, a release of something heavy I hadn't realized I was holding.